Okay, it's day 103, and Andrew McCabe is retired now, and people say, okay, George, what's next? Really going at the root of the problem of Washington, D.C. is the answer. The John Brennans of the world come to mind, and also, I know people don't want to hear this, but the secret societies that are in Washington, D.C. are not my imagination. They are quite real and they are quite intimidating. This is one such person. I think he passed away this last year, Doug Coe. But Doug Coe ran the Brotherhood. This is the real Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is a front for PAC-ISI, but this is the real Brotherhood. Well, I throw a little Hamas and Hezbollah in there, throw them all in one basket, but this is the real Brotherhood. Here he's meeting with George Bush, and he has been a fixture, or was a fixture, with the National Prayer Breakfast since Dwight David Eisenhower. You can see I did this over a year ago, this show. Here he's demonstrating how a Korean boy, a young North Korean soldier, will chop the head of his mother off without any questions if Mao asked him to on a butcher table. Okay, he in the same speech to the navigators, this is probably 84, it's an old speech, actually demonstrates, he talks about Hitler starting with 7 people at the table and having a intensely loyal group of people that you start with, and then reprisals against anyone who got out of line or didn't have complete loyalty to that group rather than the United States of America. And it's all done through a religious cover. He calls it Jesus plus nothing. And I've read a lot about Doug Coe and how they would work with different senators to recruit people in the South mainly, and especially in West Virginia through Senator Byrd. So a lot of the members of this society come from South Carolina, more the old slave states where there was already secret organizations to maintain a sort of a tacit slavery. So this is, I'll play a little clip here from over a year ago.
England, this is kind of how she approached India at that time, same way they looked at the folks of India. You look at Doug Coe here, who runs an organization called the Brotherhood, kind of started along with the CIA. It's the covert kind of enforcer that's out there in all these countries like Africa and so forth, as well as the United States, doing all this kind of enforcement of ensuring that the senators and members of the House are sort of like the chosen people. You've got elected to the House and you've gotten elected to the Senate, so now you are kind of a chosen person. Or if you're a general, or if you're at the World Bank, or if you're at the Council of Foreign Relations, you become a member of this kind of the court. There's the king, and then there's the court. And Doug Coe has these Tuesday night supper meetings with senators, and he's basically a go-between between him and this enforcement network. So I can use Doug Coe to go after my enemies. If I have enemies, let's say I'm John McCain, I could use it to go after an enemy in the press in Arizona, or I could use Doug Coe in New Mexico if I'm Jeff Epstein and I'm running a kind of a sex ranch for Sinaloa cartel. I can get rid of assistant district attorneys like Myron May that I don't like through a system of contractors. Okay, so the Doug Coe convinces the leaders that they're chosen ones. And as I mentioned yesterday, he's Mao is his, I think I might have misspelled Mao, and Hitler are the two people he talks about in this video, and their ability to, he quotes a young Red Guard here chopping the head of his mother off without a second thought on a butcher.
Okay, so you can see it's a nasty organization, and especially in Africa. These folks go to Africa. A lot of them are CIA agents. They teach the different Boko Haram and different folks how to just commit tremendous atrocities, and I'm talking rape, pillage, and plunder doesn't begin to describe it. Now here is a place called the Cedars here. If you don't know where we are, think Teresa Grafenstein right here on the water at Deloitte Touche, which a lot of old Arthur Anderson accountants there from the old DynCorp days as well as the Enron days. So here's that bridge, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, going across the two. There's your Ukrainian embassy. This is John Podesta Row here in Georgetown, and of course Georgetown University up here. Oh, there's the nice exorcist steps. Oh, that's nice to have that. But then the Cedars is over here, and this is where senators go if they get caught in an affair or anything, and this is where they go to repent. At the Cedars place. I've read all about this organization. Spooky, spooky, spooky is all I can say. Not just intimidation, but also murder. And that's how a president who served in 1984 and established a drug network down in Anacostia can still rule the roost here 30s, how many years later? 35 years later, 34 years later. So this is the dark Washington, D.C. And this is how, I mean, if you go down to the Department of Energy, where we've shot a lot, of Department of Transportation, which were typically, that was a slave pen in Washington, D.C. And this organization, along with Navy Masons before this, but Cedars kind of became this dark outgrowth of kind of this Navy Mason thinking of the slave trade, where they were using them as slave finders and so forth. But they've made very sure that this whole area is just filled with monuments to, Albert Pike and this very dark kind of slave catching history. So, and I'm serious as a heart attack, and these people will torture before death is standard. So this is what senators are always having to look over their shoulder, and this is the real Washington D.C. I call it dark Washington D.C. that needs to be addressed, and it's all these Masonic temples and all these guys who brought back slave girls from the South, and it perpetuates itself to this day. I'm not exactly sure where in Southeast. I'll go over in Southeast where that girl was. They haven't released the girl's name that I talked about last night from the lead school. But here's our favorite K Street. You got to love K Street. Pay to play K Street. And then if you haven't been to the International Spy Museum, get over there. Glorifies all of what I'm talking about. And then Union Station. Now, interestingly enough about Union Station is Robert Mueller has a place right there by Union Station, looking down on Union Station. If you go just down the hill, just down the steps, that's the SEC and Melissa Hodgman. So just kind of an interesting thing. But if you go out toward the Armory, which is going toward the Anacostia River, you'll get here in this area, and you'll start seeing all kinds of crimes that happen along this way near Congressional Cemetery. So this is the old RFK Stadium here. Here's the Stadium Armory exit, and this thinking and this spooky area is right in here. The prison, all the halfway houses, all the SEIU janitors kind of looking at your children kind of funny. Very interesting. So I'm not saying that I'm not saying the Awans go here or anything like that, but this does cast, this organization, the Brotherhood, casts a dark pall of intimidation on Washington, and they would use an organization like the Awan brothers. I'm not saying Andy McCabe knew Doug Coe and was a proponent of George Bush and went to meetings here. I'm not saying that John Brennan did. Well, maybe John Brennan did. But if you're going to find the secret dark Washington, you start looking in the places that are the darkest, and you follow the dead bodies. If you end up in the Potomac, you start here. You start looking here.